So this video is going to talk about the different fertilizers that are available when we're trying to correct very specific issues, such as we're trying to correct just nitrogen, or we're trying to correct just phosphorus, or we're trying to just correct potassium. If you notice, I have two versions of nitrogen here. I have quick release and I have slow release. Quick release, at some point they're going to blend one of these in either a long fertilizer or a balanced fertilizer and make it, that's why the numbers are going to be different. But if you were to just buy pure nitrogen in these particular ones I'm showing you here, fertilizers, these are the typical analysis for them. So the first one is ammonium nitrate. Most of us are not going to be able to get our hands on that anymore because of the rules after the terrorist attacks and everything, and the fact that ammonium nitrate can be used in making explosives. It's 3400. There's ammonium sulfate. This one's real good if you need to add some sulfur to your soil, because this is typically around 24% sulfur in the product. So you're actually getting 21% nitrogen, and then you're getting about 24% sulfate or sulfur to add to your soil. Calcium nitrate is real good if you need to add calcium to your soil at the same time. It has calcium basically encapsulated in the nitrogen. That's 1500. Then you have calcium ammonium nitrate, which is also known as CAN. Now this is very interesting because basically you can get what ammonium nitrate is, but what they did is they encapsulated all the ammonium nitrate with calcium. So you get almost the same response that you do from the ammonium nitrate, but it don't go boom, supposedly. And you get calcium at the same time. That's 2000, the last bag I got. Monoammonium nitrate. This is real good. A lot of people use these, especially when there's a phosphorus issue. They used to use mono and diammonium phosphate quite a lot. DAP was considered real good at one time until they started restricting the use of phosphorus. Monoammonium nitrate is 1140. Diammonium phosphate is 18460. Potassium nitrate 13044 is real good if you need to add a lot of potassium to your soil. Then you've got plain urea, and everybody's kind of seen urea at some point. It's used a lot in fertilizer. It's cheap, it's inexpensive. It's 4600. What I do want to point out is once you start getting above this number here, 15, these other guys that are so high, you run into a chance of burning your yard if you're not very careful. So you have to be careful using those and apply them at very, very specific rates. Then we get over to the slow release nitrogen. This is typically referred to on the bag as either SRN, slow release nitrogen, WIN, or water insoluble nitrogen, or CRN, control release nitrogen. Sources of those are monoethyl urea 2500, methylene urea 3900, isobutyl lydine diurea. You've probably heard it more affectionately known as IBDU. Most people refer to it as that instead of this nice long name because you can see how hard it's pronounced. It's 3100. Then you can have sulfur-coated urea, 3200, and polymer-coated urea. And that one can vary. That's all across the board. You look it up, you can see there's all kinds of different analysis for polymer-coated. What's of particular interest in your slow releases is when you get into these guys, they're actually coated to control the release of the nitrogen and require either, like this, some of the sulfur to be removed, or in the case of the polymer, something has to eat at it, or it actually has little bitty, like microscopic pores that only so much of the nitrogen can come out at a time. So these are your nitrogen sources. Most of the time when you get a balanced one, you'll look on the bag and, or you, like if, let's say you get a long fertilizer and you'll see something like it says, I don't know, 1503. Let's say that's an analysis. And then you'll see it's made of 10% ammoniacal nitrogen, probably 5% of sulfur or polymer coated urea, and then it might be 10% IBDU. When you start looking at these analyses now, you will be able to know, looking at the different kinds of nitrogen, whether or not you have slow release and how much slow release you actually have. Now I'm not going to get into that calculation. That's not for this series. That's another series we'll do. But these are our nitrogen sources. If you ever need to correct just plain nitrogen, you could use these, but really and truthfully, these are typically not used in lawns right here anymore because they want a certain amount of slow release. So it's one of these blended with some of these to make that happen. Alright, so now we're going to talk about the different sources of phosphorus. This time you notice I've got a salt index on here. You can have a salt index with nitrogen, but when you start messing with phosphates and potashes for potassium, salt index becomes real important then. The first source is monoammonium phosphate, or what's known as MAP. We talked about that in the nitrogen section. 1148.0. So we're putting down some nitrogen with the phosphate when we do it. Then there's diammonium phosphate, 1846.0. It's, and I meant to tell you on the salt index on the map, it's 2.44. On the diammonium phosphate, the salt index is 2.85. There's superphosphate, 0220. It has a salt index of 0.46. And my favorite one to use to correct phosphate problems or phosphorus problems is triple superphosphate, which is 0.460. And the main reason I like it is, if you look right here, 0.22 is the salt index. This guy has the least amount of salt of all the guys put together. Why is that so important? Well, it's important because most of the time when you start going into phosphates and the potashes to correct phosphorus and potassium deficiencies, you're going to most likely make multiple applications. You know, we're talking about real low situations in your soil test. You're also going to be applying them 2, maybe 3 times in a year. You're basically trying to shock that soil to get it up. This becomes very important because if we start adding a whole lot of salt to the soil, especially if it turns off hot and dry, which we can't control, you know, we put it out today, think we're fine, and then in a week we're hot and dry. The salts come up to the surface and they start causing a problem for our plants. So the lower we can run this number, the better we can. I mean, you look right here at 0.22, that is what, 5, 10, maybe 12 times less than what monoammonium phosphate is, and about 14 times less than what diammonium phosphate is. Where are you going to find these sources? Well, you can find them in a lot of places that sell turf stuff. Sometimes you're just going to have to go to an ag supply and get them. You know, this is actually, most of these are used very heavily in agriculture, not so much in yards, except for in the rare case that a soil sample has come back with a deficiency. One of these will most likely be mixed in. There is what they call rock phosphate. I think that's used in fertilizer a lot. I didn't put that down here because you wouldn't use that for a phosphorus correction on a soil sample. So there's your phosphorus part of this video. Alright, so this one will be about potassium. Now, the same thing that we said before, other than organic sources such as chicken litter, cow manure, even Lorganite, you're not going to have any real phosphorus in synthetic fertilizers. It's always going to be a potash. Your potash options to help add potassium to the soil is muriate of potash, MOPE, also known as potassium chloride, sulfate of potash, SOAP, or also known as potassium sulfate, potassium magnesium sulfate, and potassium nitrate. The analysis for each one of these is for muriate of, and I got that spelled wrong, there needs to be an I now, I apologize about that, is 0060. Sulfate of potash is 0050, and it also contains 17% sulfur. Potassium magnesium sulfate 0018, and it contains 11% of magnesium and 22% of sulfur. And then potassium nitrate, which is 13044. Now, if you're doing a serious heavy-duty potassium correction, you're probably never going to use this, even though you're getting nitrogen. Back over to that salt index. Look at that guy. Look how high he is, 2.44. The potassium magnesium sulfate has none as far as the salt index. The problem is getting your hands on this. This is almost exclusively agriculture, and everything I've ever seen, it's been in bulk. I don't think I've ever seen it in bag form. It may be out there. I'm just saying around here where I'm at, I've never seen it. I've only seen it. You buy the hopper, the big hopper, you pull it behind a tractor, you spread it over the field. You can get these two, however, in a 50-pound bag. Most places will actually have this one. I think it's easy to get the hands on than sulfate of potash. But as you can tell, you know, one of the reasons that Pete and myself are recommending these things is, one, look how low the salt index is compared to the others. It is the lowest one. Two, we're adding sulfur when we do it. Excuse me, which is a very good nutrient to add, especially if the soil is deficient. There's a little bit of an acidifying effect, a little bit, not a whole lot, but because of the sulfur, it is there. You can use muriate of potash if you can't get sulfate of potash. However, the problem you're going to run into is if you're making a heavy correction, back to the salt and what I said in the phosphorus part of it, if you have to make, say, 2 to 3 corrections in a year, you're adding a lot of salt to the soil with the muriate of potash, and you're doing less than half with the sulfate of potash. So I'm going to do a little bit here in a bit about the micronutrients and put this together, because this is going to be a fairly lengthy video as it is, but I got a bunch of questions in the last week while I was doing this video, so I figured I might put this in the series last minute. So now you know kind of when we start giving you, say, you know, go get some sulfate of potash, or we go, say, get some diammonium phosphate, or go get you some calcium nitrate. You kind of know what all that means now, and you kind of also know what's available to you if you can find it in your area.